Good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are. This is going to be an exciting live stream, the moment we've all been waiting for. Two former TV news reporters, one who quit in a little bit more style, if that's what we call it. And we're going to ask all about that. I'm fascinated to hear what Ivory was thinking before, what she was feeling. I want to know what the photographer said after that, like what her colleagues were saying. I got so many questions, and she's been gracious enough to spend an hour with us. So that is where I'm going to give my quick disclaimer, as I normally do at the beginning of my live streams, that the entirety of the live stream is going to be available on my other platforms. But this will eventually be clipped once I make sure that ODYSEE has the whole thing up, because that is one of my platforms. So ROKFIN, we're going to be simulcasting, hopefully not just on ROKFIN, but also on ODYSEE. So you can watch there. And then, of course, those platforms will have the entire live stream. Locals will have it as well. And again, AlisonMorrow.locals.com. Definitely check it out, because it's a place where I take a lot of story ideas too. It's free to watch the content. Of course, if you want to comment and share ideas, Locals has a paywall. It's minimal. I think mine's $5. But that's the place where I have, I think, the best community atmosphere, where people are talking with each other, sharing other story ideas. It's a place you can message me a lot more easily. I get fewer messages. My Patreon account also is going to get this link. But, just making sure everybody is aware, if you're watching this after the stream has ended, there's a reason why it's not an hour long, and that is to incentivize people to leave this platform for others that are not going to suppress speech and remove videos without really fair warning or even fair reasoning, in my opinion. And that actually has affected Ivory already, even though she's only recently been in this independent world. We're going to talk to her about all of that as well. So I'm going to bring her into the stream. Drum roll, everybody. Here you go. Ivory, I appreciate it. I know you have had a very busy week and a half. Any initial thoughts, I guess, before I'm going to play the live stream that started it all, or the live shot, I should say, back to use TV terminology, the live shot that started it all, in a second, so people can, remember that moment, which I'm sure has been a moment that's going to live with you forever. But since you did all of this, your initial announcement that you felt like your bosses were, essentially, what was the word you used? Muzzling? Is that the term?
Yeah, muzzling.
So tell us what's happened since then.
Well, that live shot went viral around the globe, and now I have people reaching out from the UK and Australia. I'm supposed to go on a podcast in Brazil. So it's been nonstop interviews, and it's been really overwhelming. But I'm glad that it's very well received. People are very glad to see a member of an industry that comes off so phony to come forward authentically and kind of show them what they were sensing was going on.
So let's show everybody, shall we? This is the moment that, like you were saying, went viral. It's like it got over 1 million views. And I want to ask, before I play it, what were you thinking in your mind? Like, you hear the anchor toss to you, you're like, this is the day I'm going to do it. Did you have any thoughts, maybe I'm not going to go through with this? Or were you just ready to go? Did anyone else know at your station that you were going to do this? Like, it looks like you were working with a photographer. So did that person know? It just, like, what's in your mind right before this moment?
Well, yeah, he did not know at all. My photographer was unaware. So there's one other person at the station that I did tell, but hold on, I'm getting notifications popping up. Anyway, so I had just made this decision that I had to do this. This was the best way to get the word out about what's going on. And I just needed to treat this like an assignment and not to think too much about it. Just here's what I'm going to say, and I have to say it. And it was nerve-wracking, because I kind of realized some of the gravity of what I was about to do, but actually, I did not have any idea how much impact it would have. Had I known, I probably would have been a lot more nervous, but I just tried not to think about it. I was nervous. My hands were shaking a little bit, and my photographer was really confused as to why I was nervous to talk about a heat wave.
Right. Well, let me play that, because I will say the guy in the background that people are going to see, the air conditioning guy, I want to interview him next. So I'm going to just play this real fast.
Across the region, Fox 26 reporter Ivory Hecker is live in Montgomery County to take a look at that aspect. Thanks, guys. That's right. Before we get to that story, I want to let you, the viewers, know that Fox Corp has been muzzling me to keep certain information from you, the viewers. And from what I'm gathering, I am not the only reporter being subjected to this. I am going to be releasing some recordings about what goes on behind the scenes at Fox, because it applies to you, the viewers. I found a nonprofit journalism group called Project Veritas. It's going to put that out tomorrow, so tune into them. But as for this heat wave across Texas, you can see what it's doing to AC units. This one broken down as we outages across the region. Fox.
Unmute myself. So yeah, so that guy, I'm just going to put him up, because that was my initial question after watching this was, what does this guy think? Does he know he was included in this moment? And, you know, how can I get a hold of him? Because he looks like he's like has no idea. All right, what's the photographer thinking at this moment? I'm just keep the camera going, or, you know, what does this person say afterwards?
Well, afterwards, he Project Veritas actually came right up to me right afterwards and did a quick interview with me, and then I was like, "Where's my photographer?" And then he was gone. And I was like, "Oh crap!" What's that?
You said Project Veritas was there?
Yeah, they wanted to show up and like interview me immediately afterwards. So they did that. And if you look at one of their original clips, it has that interview there. But so then my guy was gone, and I was like, oh crap, he's mad at me. He took off. I'm sorry. But then he was using the bathroom, I guess. So he came back, and I was like, hey, I'm sorry, Matt. I had to call out the bosses. They've been doing some crazy stuff. And it actually all started, their craziness all started on a story that he and I were on. So I kind of briefly mentioned that to him. I was like, yeah, you don't even know what's been going on behind the scenes with the bosses privately targeting me for a story that they sent me on. So anyway, he was just like, oh, no worries. Yeah, I was like, that wasn't part of the script. So he was really chill about it. He was very nice, and we had a nice sweet little conversation, because he and I both realized we're probably never going to work together again. So we kind of said our goodbyes right there.
Okay, I was kind of wondering if he understood the gravity of it too, because I mean, the second I watched it, I was like, okay, that's I called it suicide by live shot. I mean, you know that's there's no career after that. At least with Fox 26, I'm assuming probably no local mainstream news station, and you knew that, right, going into that was the likely outcome.
Yes, my experience with Fox, and having been in this industry with other outlets and having talked to friends in the industry, this is a widespread problem. It's never been as bad as this past year with Fox, but this past year with Fox put such a bad taste in my mouth that I wanted completely out, and I wanted the people to know. And I was like, I don't care if this destroys my chances with another corporation. I'm not sure I want to go for another corporation at this time. So I was like, people need to know what's up, and this is the best way to get that across.
We got this comment, based air conditioning reporter. Everybody, I will say, you got a lot of support out there. You're a hero, Ivory. Thanks so much. But then there are other people that are like, hey, I didn't feel like there was stuff in there that was that surprising. I'm curious, what's the reaction been that you've gotten? Have you felt like most people have been surprised by the stuff that you shared with Project Veritas? Do you feel like most people felt like after that build up, or even not most people, but just like, what were some of the varieties of reactions you got? and how did those come through? Were they mostly like through social media? I know you put your email account, which must be completely full at this point. But just curious, like initial, not just from the public, but also from your peers.
Through social media, it's been so overwhelmingly positive. They're so grateful for me to come forward and kind of shed light on what's going on. And they think it is very important information to see how certain stories get suppressed and what they do to reporters internally sometimes to control the narrative. So majority of the audience, at least through social media, gets my point and is grateful to me for it. So that's great. Members of fellow members of the media, actually a lot of mainly former news people are coming to me saying thank you so much. Some insiders in newsrooms have reached out to me as well, totally agreeing with me. And then there's others who are reaching out, giving me sympathy, which is so contrary to the audience who's celebrating and saying you're free, which is how I feel. But the members of the media feel like they should give sympathy. And then there's news outlets who have written hit pieces on me and stuff, trying to create a dramatic headline. And like one of them was like, oh, reporter blows up career because boss won't let her put her Bitcoin story out or something, which was kind of that's not the situation. In fact, I think there was only one Bitcoin story that I pitched, but other people were pitching Bitcoin stories. And just the fact that the boss came out saying it that way, that she'll shut down all Bitcoin stories because she is completely stereotyping a group of the audience. You know, Project Veritas selected that soundbite and said they thought it was important for people to see how much the newsroom is stereotyping the audience. So anyway, yeah, it's in a mixed bag, but mostly really grateful people.
That, I thought, brought up a really interesting conversation around how what the news allows on air shapes culture and thought, because you look at the news director who's sitting there saying, these people are not interested in this, which is her assumption of that. But then you also, if you go a little bit deeper, it's like, well, okay, let's just even say that certain kinds of people like one thing and they just don't like another. Of course, broad overgeneralizations, which I don't like. But let's just say that we go on board with the whole demo argument, because that's essentially what she's saying, right? And we all know that, those of us who worked in TV news, there's a specific kind of lead-in you're going to have at 4 o'clock after the Ellen show versus what you're going to do at 5. You're trying to maintain a certain audience. You want the people who are paying the most money in a household to be watching. So I always got how does the suburban soccer mom care about this? I always had to pitch my stories that way. You know, or not, I don't want to say always, but that was definitely, if I couldn't figure out how to get the suburban soccer mom to watch, then, you know, I was already starting off on one foot. But then you ask yourself, well, like, what people care about often can be shaped by what messages they're given, right? So it's like, do people care about things because they just don't care, or because we in our industry tell them that they shouldn't care or they should care? And it seemed like your boss was not necessarily like asking that particular question, or at least that wasn't, you know, it was just like, well, this is what we feel like matters to the people that we have decided we know how they think. And so we're only going to give this kind of information. But you can see how it's like, is it a chicken or the egg argument? Are we driving public discussion? Are we driving public values? And by virtue of our stereotyping what people care about, we create that, not the other way around.
Yeah, I agree. Chicken or the egg situation. It's hard to say. And I wish the news would not stereotype people so much. So yeah, that's just one of the issues. But that was not the main issue I was trying to get across to people. The issue is that the entire narrative is being strangled. If it comes to internally defaming a reporter, they'll do that. And this is not about, oh, that story just doesn't fit in our half hour or our hour of news. it's like them issuing edicts like, you will not disseminate this information on air or online. So that's where it gets weird. And it didn't get weird like that in my 9 years as a reporter until this past year. Something weird is up with Fox.
Well, I think something weird has been around for a long time, but COVID amplified it. It was just like, it just juiced it like a steroid, what's been going on in the industry for a while. I don't know a single reporter, though, who feels like, they just get to do everything that they want to do. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you about is like, where is the line? And maybe first we should just go back in time to what happened, because I think, just getting that out there for people, like, give us the timeline, what was going on. And before even, we get into that, I just want to say, so like, I feel like I get this sometimes. And I feel like as I've been watching the reaction to this, it's like, whose side are you on? Team Ivory or team, mainstream journalists? Because I have been watching the reaction of our peers. I hear a lot of like, oh, come on, this is just, we all have to deal with this. This is just somebody being whiny or whatever else. Or you hear from people saying like, screw the media, and they're really angry. And I often, as with many things, I notice like extreme versions of, you have to draw a line. And I want to be really clear with people too, that, I'm on team what the F is going on here. And I just want to know. So I hope that, we can really dig into some of the questions that I've heard from people, and that you can offer people some perspective, like journalist to journalist, so that I want people to understand, like, I don't approach reality that way. And maybe that's why sometimes it's hard to be on YouTube, because as much as people say, I don't like bias in the media, I do think sometimes people like to have their tribes, and they like to feel like they know where they belong. And so then if you're somebody who comes at a situation and says, I have a question about this, I'm curious about this, I'm not sure I agree with that, all of a sudden, like, you have defected from whatever team they expect you to be on, and then they just don't want to hear from you anymore. But I want to go back to the hydroxychloroquine conversation, because like you were saying, I watched you on Tim Pool, it sounded like there was some frustration, maybe as a normal reporter dealing with stuff, having ideas shot down in editorial meetings, but that whatever happened a year ago or 10 months ago was when it really started to amplify. So how did you go from somebody who was like, okay, I'm working in an industry where I feel like I don't necessarily get to do everything I want to do, but I still like it enough to stay in it, to a reporter that's like, okay, I'm just going to blow the top off of this. And this is not the same as an editorial decision-making process. This is, in fact, suppression of information, which is hurting the public. And I can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, last August, they set an intense precedent when they sent me to this story. Okay, this is a story they approved and sent me to cover COVID treatment at this hospital, and decided that the doctor said the wrong thing. The bosses at Fox decided this doctor said the wrong thing, the viewers should not hear it. And they gave me an excuse why it shouldn't make it on air. Oh, it doesn't have the context of other drugs. So my audience was buzzing about hydroxychloroquine. They were hungry for more information on what the heck's going on with hydroxychloroquine. So I knew this was a newsworthy soundbite that the audience would eat up. So I wasn't going to let it go to waste. So the boss said, well, if you put it out, it needs the context of other drugs. I was like, fantastic. That's a great idea. What was the soundbite? Can you summarize that? For the doctor, this was an interview. We literally talked. I tried to get a full context of how this hospital was being really hit with COVID, how full it was, how they were, I talked about ventilators and all that. Final question was, are you guys using hydroxychloroquine? And he said, yes, we are. I know it's controversial, but we're having success. But we do throw the kitchen sink at these patients, so we're not always sure what is working, but we do have hydroxychloroquine in the COVID treatment recipe, and we're having success. So that was basically his soundbite, and I put it up on Facebook with a caption of all the other drugs he's using, the whole recipe. I put his whole recipe on there for how he treats COVID, which, by the way, no news covers that. No news outlets talks about exactly how doctors are treating COVID. That's a little strange. Anyway, so I put that out, and then that's when the bosses cracked down on me. It said that I had failed as a reporter. They put me on a social media blackout. I wasn't able to post anything for a while. And then they wrote an internal defamatory letter about me, put it in my file to hurt my reputation internally. And I was like, this is really out of left field. I'm someone who has a fantastic relationship with my news director. She and I just naturally click, and she would always applaud me. I would applaud her. To this day, I think she's such a the most hardworking news director I've ever worked for, who really cares about her product. And I was like, this is out of left field, Susan. This doctor admitted to just what he's doing, and you're punishing me for that. Very strange. So anyway, that the precedent they set there, and she admitted that it was coming down from her bosses. She basically was forced to do this to me, or perhaps forfeit her job. So that's a really creepy situation. When the corporate executives are saying, we're not okay with the truth on the ground, so we're going to teach the reporter a lesson about following narrative. I don't know if perhaps they wanted me to get it through my head that from here on out, you pay attention to the narrative and you follow it, or else. That's all I can gather from that. But what I learned from that is that I'm no longer safe to just do journalism. If they're willing to do that to me in this story, then what's the next story that they're not going to like? How am I supposed to know? So I was completely in danger suddenly as a journalist, when all I'm doing is collecting facts and putting them out, and I get crucified for that. So that's a big lesson in being timid. They're basically saying you need to become a timid journalist who seeks out your boss's orders first before you do anything. And basically like, oh, is this okay, or is that not safe news? We better not put out, it's not safe news. So it was just that was the big turning point for me, where I was like, this is unheard of in journalism. So that's when I decided I wanted out. And then many more strange, unjournalistic things happened after that. But I did have to get a defamation lawyer who encouraged me to record everything. So I did record everything, and I have hours and hours of recordings.
I'm guessing that Texas is a one-party consent state, so that was why that was allowed. And were you thinking when you were doing all that eventually those were going to end up going to Project Veritas, or was it just recording them for legal purposes to begin with?
It was to protect myself. I started recording so that if this does have to go to court for defamation or for harassment or discrimination, which they did, they definitely harassed and discriminated against me. If it had to come to that, I had the recordings to protect myself. But it hit me later on that, I don't want to be a part of this industry anymore. And when I leave, I need to be straightforward with the viewers on why I'm leaving, because it does apply to them. This is something where the company got in the way of the facts on the ground. And hopefully we can prevent that from happening again. Hopefully my story strikes some fear into these crazy corporate bosses and makes them realize that if they keep doing this to innocent journalists and to true stories, that they are going to get called out for it. The public deserves some transparent news. The public deserves to have journalists working for them, because we journalists, we work for the public. The public deserves journalists who are not living in fear, journalists who are free to go wherever, collect whatever is truly happening, and freely put it out without fear of their bosses. There's too much self-censorship in our industry. I want to get rid of some of this fear, empower some of the journalists to just live, just collect what's happening and disseminate it. So I hope that me telling this story will protect some innocent journalists, and therefore protect the truth and get the truth out to the public more.
When I heard the word safe used by your boss, I was thinking, oh God, like that was where I really like, okay, it really is from their standpoint that, we just don't want to tread in these waters, and just being like sort of risk averse with a topic that if you know, what you're saying about the audience interest in it, you know, was at that level. It seems very odd that she would like not do a Bitcoin story because she feels like the audience is not interested in it. But then there is a story that you bring her where you're like, people are asking about this. There's a lot of interest in it. And they're like, no, you know, like, okay, wait a second. Do you care what the audience is interested in or not? Like, so, but to that point, Ivory, I'm really curious. What then do you think is normal, healthy, functional editorial process versus what you feel like is suppression, bias, you know, purposeful propaganda and manipulation? Because, you know, again, like obviously a newsroom can't do everything. I have a friend who quit because she worked north of Seattle. She was assigned to work north of Seattle. And she felt like her bosses in Seattle didn't care at all about a lot of the stuff that the people north of Seattle who lived in rural agricultural areas thought very differently than the average urban Seattleite. They just weren't interested in that. And constantly she was getting shot down. What's the difference between like the grudge that every reporter carries around, which is like, my bosses don't understand me. They don't want to do what I'm interested in. I have to constantly pitch for the suburban soccer mom, versus what you went through. And what, I guess, would you have said, okay, this is an acceptable reason to say, no, Ivory, you can't do it, versus what happened?
Well, in the pandemic, you know, you talked about it amplifying some things, and we saw in the pandemic such a separation from the news business's reality and the public's reality. And you could easily see that in the comment section. Every day we had viewers screaming at us with questions in the comment section that my bosses adamantly refused to answer those questions. And one of the big ones was vaccines. There was an immense number of viewers who were leery about vaccines in one way or another. Maybe they were okay with it, but they had strong questions for their children, or whatever it be. But the bosses railroaded through this narrative that the vaccines are 100% safe and effective and will save lives for everyone. And you better not question it, or you're a crazy person. So what Fox was doing there was alienating all of the vaccine hesitant audience. And I'm just sitting here trying to prevent my company from committing suicide because ratings are plummeting, okay? And so I'm trying to pitch the viewers questions. You know, while the viewers are wondering, you know, why the CDC is taking away certain information from its website. Maybe CDC says they're not going to report all of the breakthrough COVID cases. Let's talk to the local health department about letting people know how much, you know, just, and then the word about deaths. It was really weird when Fox assigned me to a vaccine story, but gave me strict guidelines to not let the public know that at that point, CDC was reporting 3,000 people had died after vaccination. This is a few months ago. That number's a lot higher now. So 3,000 people had died after vaccination, according to the CDC, and my boss gave strict guidelines to not let the audience know that. What is that? They're giving a very pro-vaccine narrative, preventing certain facts from coming through that don't fit the narrative. And that is the journalism school definition of propaganda. Okay. It doesn't matter whether you're pro-vaccine yourself or anti-vaccine. The loyalty is to the viewers and answering their questions. And if you are refusing to answer viewer certain questions because your main goal is to simply persuade viewers, then you're working in a propaganda business. So that was one example of let's look at the audience's question. It's not about what I want to cover. The audience has been screaming at us and turning off their TVs. Our ratings went down 30 to 40% this year compared to last year. So that's kind of that's one of the things when the bosses are saying. There were a couple times where the bosses said, not only are you not going to cover this on TV, but you are prohibited from posting about it on social media. Now that's where it goes into, this is no longer about, oh, we got to cater to our 5 o'clock audience while fitting the time constraints and getting all the news we can in. No, they're actually shutting down some information because the World Wide Web, it's unlimited space to disseminate facts. And they're saying certain facts are not allowed for the public to hear. So that's when we really crossed the line into suppression of certain information to direct a narrative. It was very alarming. Have not witnessed that in my entire career until last year. So we're in a weird state in the media, and I think the public should know.
I completely agree that COVID has been one massive propaganda machine with mainstream news. I'm surprised how thick it is too with local newsrooms. In part, I think, local newsrooms do better when they stay closer to topics that are, given the fact that even the most well-meaning reporter gets like 4 hours a day to talk about something, understand it, and then 90 seconds to report it. It's a much easier to go to City Hall and like stick to the local thing. Not that there aren't, obviously there are local vaccination clinics and whatnot. That's probably how they look at it. But like the actual larger debate about mRNA or the scientists who have been very concerned about the long-term effects, about how new this is, the lack of human trials and all that stuff. Those are not voices that are often being allowed. And maybe there's like one Department of Health person who's like, maybe allowed to say a little bit about, there are certain things that we're still looking into, but not anywhere to the level of, say, the former VP of Pfizer, who has been very concerned about it. People who have worked on the creation of mRNA. It's, to me, like, even the WHO yesterday just came out and said, we need more information about the long-term effects on children. But if you were somebody who was saying that before, you were potentially a conspiracy theorist, and newsrooms, are not letting people talk about that. We'll see if they just switch over to whatever the WHO says, which brings up, another real problem, I think, nowadays with trusting the government. If they're like the Department of Health is the authority, whatever they're saying, it was very odd how, like, if Trump said it, though, it was always wrong, or it was often very wrong for mainstream news. But then, if it was somebody who was like anti-Trump, but in the government, or nowadays it's just like full-fledged, we trust bureaucratic sources. And I do think that was still something that in my time in the news was very common, like just trusting what the government was saying about health issues in this particular case. Like, oh, well, what does the Department of Health say? But even like law enforcement, what does the police department say? And what's the official standard, what is the official statement? And often that was just like thrown out there with not a ton of real questions that were not just safe questions, not just safe dissent, like actual real dissent. However, when I was, it was probably 6 months before I was about to leave. So in 2019, before this was even a talking point, Washington was going through a debate over what kind of freedoms parents should have about vaccinating their kids and then sending them to school, right? It was this whole, like, should you be able to have this philosophical exemption? It was about to be taken away. And so there were all these protests over it. And I covered the environment, so it wasn't even something I was going to be covering, but there was typically, our coverage was typically like parents yelling at each other or at protests, but we never were we would talk to doctors of the Department of Health, you got to get vaccinated for all of these reasons. But we didn't talk to other doctors that were of the same training that would say, well, here are concerns about, why parents should have this opportunity, this freedom to make a different decision. Well, there was a group of doctors that were coming to town, and I happened to hear about it. And so, triple board certified people who are like, on the front line of understanding vaccine safety, which again, like, it always gets broken down into that same tribalism I talked about earlier. Are you anti-vax? Are you pro-vax? There's a way to people. If I were to say I don't like bleach in my water, it doesn't mean that I'm anti-water. It means that I want water that's safe to drink. And so when you have people like Bobby Kennedy talking about safe vaccines, it doesn't mean anti-vax, but that's how people often frame it. I think it's a straw man argument to keep you from being able to actually discuss the facts, which I think happened to you too. I think there were a lot of ad hominems against you so that people didn't have to actually discuss what you were bringing up, which I think you brought up some fair points, but oftentimes it just got steamrolled off like, oh, she's just doing this to launch her career or whatever else. But it's like, let's debate what she's actually saying. Anyway, long story short, my boss told me that I was never allowed to pitch a vaccine story. My idea was, let's talk to the doctors. Like, we always had these parents yelling at each other. There's a group of doctors. Let's have the doctors debate. Like, that seemed to be, to me, a very obvious way to cover something we were already covering. And my boss was just like, you have to come direct to me. You can never go to the assignment desk. You can never go to another reporter and say, hey, this is something that I found out. Maybe we should look into it because I just don't trust you. And it was like it really felt like it was totally out of the blue. He said, I trust you on everything else, but I don't trust you on this.